Yeah, I mean, I would just say this. I mean, I think there was already a long-term tailwind behind this part of the industry, but I think COVID could prove to be the watershed moment for the emergence of outdoor lodging as a distinct asset class. I think that if the consumer interest maintains this sort of trajectory of interest, which I believe it will for various reasons, then eventually the capital will follow. And I don't think that's going to change anything that we've talked about. I think the rules and the sort of some of these non-starters and prerequisites for getting funded, they're not going to change. But I think the volume of capital behind good quality deals is going to increase, and it's going to result in a creative expansion of this industry in ways that should be really good for clever entrepreneurs who have well-developed business plans and, as you say, Bryan, a proof of concept. So the market's tight in general, but for other reasons, this crisis has presented a moment of opportunity to this industry that we're all so interested in. And I do think that it's going to be I do think it's going to result in more capital for the right deals.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Glamping podcast. I'm your host, Ruben Martinez. In many of my day-to-day conversations with aspiring operators, growing operations, manufacturers, and vendors, I'm often confronted with questions around the best way to access capital in this space. Quick spoiler alert, there's no version of us being able to cover all of the complex nuances to investment strategy in the unique outdoor lodging space in one podcast. But what we can do is begin to demystify the process, your options, and the reality of what is actually going on right now, and how investors are thinking about the present and the future of glamping. I typically say that to start an operation, you obviously need a few things: land, structures, an operator, and capital. But the reality is that all of these items have a dependency on one thing: capital. There's no way around it. I've had countless conversations with individuals and organizations that struggle to access capital, even though they have had several of these pieces put together. And from a high level, they have everything buttoned up. And on the other end of the table, I consistently speak with, and there are many capital sources looking to deploy capital in this space, but they too often struggle with completely understanding this growing space and matching up how to invest intelligently, but in a way that matches up with the expectations of their investors. I can tell you with complete confidence, the appetite is there on both ends. So why does the disconnect still exist? And why do people still struggle to finance their businesses? Well, like I mentioned earlier, we can't possibly get to that all in one session. But let me let you in on a little secret. Sometimes it's you, sometimes it's them. But 100% of the time, there just isn't an easy off-the-shelf solution which can cause a process to create significant hurdles. But I thought a great start would be to bring in 3 experts in the space for a conversation and the beginning part of our series looking at capital in the space. I've known Bayat, Bryan, and David for quite some time now, and don't worry, they will introduce themselves, and I hope you enjoy the conversation.
We've got some great guests, and I'm excited to talk with them. We are, no doubt in a very, very exciting time in the outdoor space, in outdoor hospitality. It just really is an exciting time in the industry. When you look at what this summer has turned into, as people are emerging from, we can't even call it the post-COVID world. It's more of a post-isolation world, and cruises still being scary. International travel is still a little bit unknown. We've got a big subset of the population that's gravitating towards the outdoors because of the boxes that it checks for them. They're able to drive 1 to 3 hours to these beautiful destinations. Gas is cheap. They're able to self-isolate in many of these style of accommodation with self-contactless check-in. I know from a Glamping Hub standpoint, Our bookings have exceeded record levels, and I know that's the same with many other operators and OTAs. Through the association, we're seeing also record levels of people and organizations trying to figure out how they can fit into the big picture and get their businesses moving forward and their projects moving forward, and then also deploying capital into the space. But to me, this is a very important topic because through all of our conversations, it's obvious that getting any version of a project off the ground is difficult. It's not an easy thing to do. And the entrepreneur, the operator, whomever, they have to wear a lot of hats. They've got to do the business plan, the capital raise, maybe the entitlements, the land acquisition, the hospitality piece, the marketing piece, and that's just, looking at it through the operator. And so I've always been a big proponent for, how do we de-risk a lot of these operations and provide the right tools and resources so that people can, stick to their strengths and move their operations forward. So today I am, excited to have a conversation about the capital perspective in this space. And luckily I've got three individuals who are a lot smarter than me, a lot better good looking than me, and three individuals who have just great experience in this space. And so excited to jump into some questions there. So let's start here. Let's just start with David and then go to Bryan and then go to Beat. For those people who do not know who you are, do you mind just giving a quick, 1 minute, 2 minute overview of who you are and what you do? And then we'll jump into the questions after that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ruben, and pleasure to be with you guys. My name's David Smith. I've spent most of my career working in hospitality, real estate, finance, primarily on the traditional side of the industry, in typical brick and mortar hotels in urban environments and traditional resorts. I was most recently with a national real estate investment banking group here in the US called Robert Douglas. And we became interested in the later stages of my time there in glamping and outdoor lodging, and were involved in the capitalization of a few of the better known national names in the glamping space in the US. And I now work for myself at an independent lodging advisory business called Seaforth Advisory, still involved both in the traditional and also the outdoor or glamping lodging businesses.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Good to have you.
Thanks, Ruben. Thanks, David. Bryan Auchterlonie with Destination Capital. A lot like David, I'd spent the early formative part of my career in the finance side, principally in hospitality. And recently, I guess, as of 2 years ago, it feels like yesterday, but started Destination Capital. We're an investment advisory and management firm based out of Denver, Colorado. And we focus in three sectors: the vacation rental space, boutique hotels and lodges, and then, of course, outdoor accommodations. And seeing a lot of the structures and companies out there today, and it's just a very exciting time. So thanks for having me today.
Thanks, Bryan.
Hi, everybody. My name is my name is Beat, not Beat. So a lot of people might be confused as they think, how can you call a person Beat? It's a typical Swiss name. I'm a guy from the Alps. I'm currently actually in beautiful Jesolo in Italy, close to Venice. I have co-founded Falkenstein Ventures some 2 years ago. My partner is a hotelier. They own a hotel chain. I'm actually in one of their beautiful hotels. And we are a boutique venture capital firm just purely focused on travel, hospitality, leisure, and we also do a little bit of elderly care, as we think there's a nice overlap between hospitality and elderly care. And I actually grew up with a lot of camping, glamping in Interlaken, Switzerland. And I learned, let's say, how big the potential of camping and glamping is in my time in tour operations in Europe, in a lot of countries in Europe, specifically in France, in the Netherlands, in the UK, in Germany. So I would say we have a strong affinity towards camping, which is also reflected in our future investments.
Yeah, thank you for that. Appreciate it. So yeah, let's just go ahead and jump into this. First one's for you, David. And I know this is, some of these questions aren't necessarily going to be fair. So sorry, but not sorry. Just high level, because we've talked about this, just a lot of versions of this in the past and versions of this question in the past, but just to kick us off here, in your opinion, why is it fundamentally challenging to access capital in this industry? I mean, what are some of the fundamental challenges in this industry for accessing capital?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think it's something that clearly a lot of entrepreneurs in this space grapple with every day. I think some of the answer comes down to what you've identified, Ruben, which is that although camping and glamping are not exactly new concepts, I think the modern surge in interest in that space from the consumer side is a relatively kind of new and novel thing. And so this whole subsector of the lodging industry that we're talking about doesn't have the same rule books and the same track record that other parts of lodging or even commercial real estate in general do. So I think some of it just has to do with that. The other way that I sort of frame that question in my mind is, it's challenging, yes, but challenging compared to what? I mean, being a glamping entrepreneur sort of has elements of being any other entrepreneur seeking VC funding, and it's got other elements of being a commercial real estate investor. And I think comparing glamping to the fundraising processes in those two sectors is kind of an interesting way to think about it. When you compare it to commercial real estate in general, people always talk about how lodging is a combination between real estate and an operating business, right? And I think one extension of that idea is that as you start moving into more kind of remote geographical destinations, which is part of the appeal of glamping, what that often, but not always means, is that the value of the real estate goes down. And it means that the onus and the value of the business becomes more and more incumbent on the operating side. And so I think there is a higher hurdle to clear for glamping entrepreneurs than there may be for investors in boring office buildings in urban markets. There's more operational complexity. There's less plan B if things don't go well. And so when you compare it to the VC side, there's some interesting comparisons as well. Lodging real estate in general doesn't really have a minimum viable product in the same way that starting a software business does. It takes a lot of capital to start even a relatively simple glamping business. So it's difficult to establish a proof of concept and then go out and then capitalize that. Glamping is light touch by nature, but it's still a relatively capital intensive business. Whether you're buying land or leasing land, you just need a lot more money to get any sort of real estate business or glamping business off the ground. So to me, they're kind of some of the key challenges. But as I'm sure we're going to talk about, I think there are a lot of tailwinds that are helping entrepreneurs now and will help entrepreneurs in this space in the future that we can focus on to try and offset some of those challenges.
David, what you mentioned is 100% spot on. I mean, I think the first thing we all have to acknowledge in real estate lodging generally, right, is capital raising is always difficult, right? Regardless of the industry you're in, regardless of how grand your assets are and your operating experience, the capital raise project is always challenging, right? And filled with minefields, right? And then when you look at an industry that's a growing industry, an important industry in the lodging ecosystem, it's not very liquid, right? And it's a very asset light business, right? It takes capital to get going, but it's not like you're financing a Midtown Manhattan skyscraper, right? Which is a lot easier to feel and touch. You're essentially financing an experience. And so the subset of investors, as you kind of go down that funnel, becomes relatively smaller and smaller. And that will change over time, right? We're seeing some kind of institutionalization of it. But let's not forget, right? Glamping is still very, and outdoor accommodations generally appeals to a very organic, industry focus and subset of consumer group. And so despite wanting, I think, to have maybe more institutionalization of it, we also, I think, need to be mindful that the organic nature of it is what provides a lot of the tailwinds, right?
And to go off of that, Beat, speaking of that entrepreneur and the heavy lift that they often have to make in your day-to-day conversations, and as you are vetting potential businesses that you and the fund are interested in investing in, what is really important for that entrepreneur and that expanding business to show now to investors in the current climate? What are some of those priorities for those new enterprises?
Well, I believe if you look at maybe a little bit less like what is glamping or outdoors, if you look more like what are the metrics or the KPIs investors would look at in hotels, for instance, or hotel concepts, and one of those being GOP, gross operating profit. There you have a really strong argument in glamping, as you have costs which are by far less than building those beautiful traditional hotel rooms. And on the other hand, you should be able to generate a lot more GOP, gross operating profit, and that's just one. And I think if you have a concept, not just one hotel or one plot, and I think that's often a problem that people will come and say, I have a beautiful plot somewhere. Okay, I have one too. So very often it feels like these are projects that really come from the heart, but they are not really interested for investors. So if people are out there and would think, okay, what would I need to do to not only have one beautiful resort, but maybe 10, 20, hundreds, and then combining this with showing what is your gross operating profit and some other metrics, then I think you have a fair chance to convince also traditional investors. As let's say a couple of years ago, everybody was running into the cities and everybody wanted to invest in city hotels, and there's still a lot of money out there. And I think people with smart and sustainable good concepts will be able to convince investors. But don't go there with just one plot.
Right. And kind of going off of that as well, in a lot of our conversations through, whether it's Glamping Hub or the association, and in the post-COVID world, and this question's for any one of you that want to take a stab at this, we find that many of the operations, because, as you mentioned, Bryan, there's this level of being able to feel and touch certain projects that people are comfortable with, right? Capital gets comfortable with a certain playbook, and then they like to deploy the capital that meets that playbook. But glamping, outdoor unique accommodations, more boutique shops, they don't necessarily have that type of home with capital, right? So there's this awkward range where you've got, for some smaller projects, they can do friends and family or some smaller capital. And then you've got more institutional capital that really only wants to deploy $50 million at a time. But then you've got this middle awkward range of, maybe $1 million or $2 million that becomes very hard for maybe some projects to operate. What do you guys suggest for those entrepreneurs, those business owners, those operators that fall into that awkward middle ground?
I can start, and I'd really love to hear Beat's and David's perspective on this. Glamping or any other small business startup is incredibly difficult, but also incredibly exciting. And so the financing opportunities, be it glamping or be it starting a small manufacturing offering or whatever sector you're in, requires a certain amount of bootstrapping and support of friends and family. We've fortunately and unfortunately seen large institutional investors in the space, which I think provides us all optimism and hope that there's perhaps more liquidity out there for glamping and outdoor accommodations than maybe there is. But a lot of the true essence of a small business is really the bootstrap effort and proof of concept, right? It sounds, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but I just, I really firmly believe in that. And further, the institution or the investment community will have that as almost a prerequisite before investing, right? How much money have you put in, and how much hustle have you put around to really get this operation going, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll piggyback off that. I totally agree with Bryan. I think, the inconvenient truth in this industry right now probably is that, most of the projects out there, maybe, they may have entrepreneurs behind them who really believe in them, but need to be sort of professionalized before they'll become financeable. And a big part of that is proof of concept, no doubt. I mean, you can look at, as you said, Bryan, I mean, you can sort of look at the pockets of institutional capital that have found their way into this industry so far and trace that back and, study those partnerships. And proof of concept is for sure, I think almost like an absolute prerequisite to tapping into that source of capital. And before you get to that stage, for lack of a better term, before you get to that stage, right now it's kind of like the Wild West. There is no rule book. It's every deal has a different story. It's going to have a different path to getting capitalized. It's probably going to involve some degree of bootstrapping. It's probably going to involve some degree of friends and family. And I think a big part of it as well is using the resources, like what Ruben, you've put together at the American Glamping Association to help people take these kind of dream projects and through a lot of hard work, transform them into something that becomes financeable. And I think, going from that conceptualization to the point where you can start having serious discussions with, the select number of institutional groups that are deploying capital into this business right now, it's going to be a different path for everybody. And I think there's a lot of room for creativity in that path. It may be you're breaking the project down into phases to reduce the amount of capital you need for phase 1 versus phase 2 and phase 3. It may mean you're leasing rather than buying to get down your upfront capital for phase 1. It might mean you're negotiating with some of your vendors to offer them some sort of equity stake in the project in lieu of, an upfront capital contribution. In the US, I understand this is not as relevant to your projects, Beat, in Europe, but I think, exploring SBA loans is an interesting path here. Exploring local bank loans, trying to collateralize the land if you've got some that you already own. There's all sorts of creative ways to think about it, but I think the key theme is, as you say, Bryan, until you get to that point where, it's a real business and you can demonstrate proof of concept, the path is a little bit different for everyone. And at least at this point in the maturation of this business, creativity is key in my mind.
And maybe to add to that, I think also people should give a bit more thought, at least to those concepts we have seen. Also, is there a way to really scale those concepts? Not just doing one proof of concept after the other. So what are the means, either by franchise concepts or other smart ideas? I think that would help also to differentiate your concept if you can show a path to really scale up and not just, let's say, organically grow.
Perfect. And Beat, let me throw this one right back at you, and then interested to see, David and Bryan, your take as well. But, super relevant to Beat. In your day-to-day, you talk to a lot of entrepreneurs. You're looking at various types of organizations and various style of entrepreneurs. In this post-isolation world, the types of companies, the types of entrepreneurs that you're looking at, the ones that get you the most excited, the ones that you're funding, the projects that really seem to be hitting the mark, is there something that each one of those projects have in common? Or is it so different that you honestly just have to take one look at a time? Or is there a common thread that especially in this post-isolation world, that seems to be resonating, seems to be hitting with you guys, and everybody at the fund? Is there anything in common that these projects have that you're most excited about?
Well, has always been and will always be, I guess, is people. First and foremost, we invest in people and not just in concepts. And that has been true before, and I think is even more true post-COVID. And then for us specifically, there has been a new, let's say, category of investments during the past months, which is there's obviously a lot of businesses under pressure and some of the businesses going into insolvency. So we've been able to cherry pick some of those businesses, which is nice from an investor's point of view, but is a drama mostly for the founders. But that has been our, I would not say focus, but has been a large part of our work during the COVID phase to really see what's out there and then pick this and pick that and combine with other businesses, which has been quite successfully so far. And also giving those businesses who tended to go into insolvency a fresh new perspective.
Thank you. David and Bryan, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I think the key thing to me and the key challenge again for most of these businesses is professionalization. It's presenting a cohesive business plan that can stand up by itself. I think it's demonstrating to investors that you've thought through everything that needs to be thought through, whether that's entitlements, zoning, land use, understanding local building codes and whether you're going to be compliant with them, doing a really proper feasibility analysis. You know, a lot of these projects are in highly seasonal markets. By nature, they are predominantly leisure businesses. So, you know, understanding what that means for your midweek occupancy and understanding how that's built into the pro forma. And then, you know, aside from all the other ones, I think Beat hits a really important point as well, which is scalability. I mean, I often think about scalability in terms of what I like to think of as internal and external scalability. Internal being, you know, are you going to be able to build a business that reaches the critical mass to offset the cost of your time and your employees' time and generate a return on capital? And then, you know, I think to really get these institutional sources of capital excited, you've also got to show the external scalability, which means, you know, hopefully number one goes great, but once you've completed number one, can you replicate that model, you know, 10, 20 more times in the future? So there's an endless list of, I think, criteria to really get the capital excited, but I think you hit the nail on the head, Beat. I think it's being able to show that there's a real business and then show that that business can scale.
And Beat, to your first point, and this might seem like a straightforward or maybe even a silly question, but it's something that I've spoken to with several entrepreneurs who've pitched their project and haven't had the success in the first conversation. And as you said, you invest, you know, first and foremost in the individual, first and foremost in that business owner and that person. And that's a very, you know, important part of the decision-making process. You know, we've gotten feedback that, you know, that first conversation, you know, especially for somebody who might be new to this world, new to this industry, that first conversation can be very scary. And they often feel that they've basically tanked that conversation and didn't do a good job. And they feel they didn't receive a call back because of that. And yes, you know, you've got a good business plan. And yes, there's a version of having everything buttoned up. But, you know, this importance of that connection maybe on the first call or two, just bringing it back around to, you know, if capital is extremely interested in investing in the individual, do you have any recommendations on things that those individuals should be doing in that first call or prior to the first call or after the first call? Because I've definitely received feedback of this, well, it was all on that call and I think I ruined it, and because I didn't ask this or I didn't do this, and they're really hard on themselves. And usually I come back and say, well, I don't think it's because of just how you acted during that call, but do you have any feedback for, you know, those entrepreneurs and individuals as maybe they're heading into their first call tomorrow? You know, what suggestions can you give them?
Just pitch as if you would pitch to your mother. So I think you should not pitch as you pitch into investor. Don't start with KPIs and, you know, scalability and all those bloody buzzwords. I think you have such a beautiful topic to touch the hearts and the emotions of the audience, and every investor is a consumer as well. Everybody doesn't want to, nobody wants to go to a can-do-nothing.com hotel. So I think, how can you not be successful to pitch your business? Be it scalable or not, but I think touch their hearts and then do the maths and the business plan and the hockey sticks and everything, do that at a later stage.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny you mentioned that, right? It's a great point, Beat, that, I mean, how many conversations we all been in where the individual you're talking to is just kind of over their skis on something, right? And they're not comfortable with it. And it just adversely impacts the pitch or the conversation because they're trying to connect with you in some way that they're not comfortable doing. So great piece of advice, Beat. Be yourself, be genuine, be authentic, be the passion and the vision oftentimes wins the day. And the other things that are maybe more back of house, accounting, finance, more advanced topics are important, no doubt, but secondary, right?
And would you say, in your mindset, the conversations that you're having pre-COVID versus today, is there a big difference in where your excitement lies? As in, did the world that we're operating in now accelerate your excitement for the space? Is it more or less the same? Is there something in specifically that capital is excited about in this space? Is there any kind of secret sauce that you guys can give the listeners, as in, hey, capital is really chomping at the bit at this version of this industry? Is there anything that you're seeing in your day-to-day conversations that you feel capital is just excited now, and maybe 4 months ago wasn't really even on the radar?
I'll say this just to start the conversation. I don't know. I think we've all kind of seen this in some form or fashion, but the general model of operations is introducing folks to the outdoors and making them comfortable in an outdoor setting, right? And the product has become less important in doing that. So, whereas 2 months ago or 6 months ago, it could have been Airstreams and yurts and canvas tents and, trailers, it's certainly going to look a lot different going forward, right? Provided the outdoor experience remains true and core to the consumer, right? The other part I'd say is just the investment capital, if you will, where it's evaluating is really looking at scale, right? And proof of concept, and these just critical kind of core ingredients of a plan that are you just can't put some projections together and say, we're going to value the operating company at $10 million and start taking investments. That just will not pass muster in this environment. So really being super focused on proof of concept, the details, understanding the business, especially in a circumspect investment, climate, is hypercritical.
I think there was already a long-term tailwind behind this part of the industry, but I think COVID could prove to be the watershed moment for the emergence of outdoor lodging as a distinct asset class. I mean, we've seen some anecdotal evidence of that already in how difficult it is to get a reservation at an auto camp or a collective retreats right now. The consumer interest, I think, has been piqued by COVID. And I think that if the consumer interest maintains the level, this sort of trajectory of interest, which I believe it will for various reasons, then eventually the capital will follow. And I don't think that's going to change anything that we've talked about. I think the rules and the sort of some of these non-starters and prerequisites for getting funded, they're not going to change. But I think the volume of capital behind good quality deals is going to increase, and it's going to result in a creative expansion of this industry in ways that should be really good for clever entrepreneurs who have well-developed business plans and, as you say, Bryan, a proof of concept. So, yeah, I mean, clearly right now is not a great time in the capital markets in general, and especially in hospitality. But I think we're in this sort of weird pocket where the market's tight in general, but for other reasons, this crisis has presented a moment of opportunity to this industry that we're all so interested in. And I do think that it's going to be I do think it's going to result in more capital for the right deals.
Maybe one, I completely agree to what you both have said. And maybe one thing which I sometimes find a bit disturbing is this is so much a down-to-earth, back-to-nature business. And I think people also, post-COVID, they should leave the whole bullshit aside. Also the whole valuation, the fantasies and dreams, be a little bit more realistic. It's a honest business which we are discussing here, and I think people should be honest and less dreaming, a little bit more down to earth. So just take the bullshit out, and then might help as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, guys. And let me start with Beat on this question. So I've heard it from both angles. I've heard the aspiring operator entrepreneur say, listen, there just isn't capital in this space. It doesn't matter what I do. Capital doesn't exist in this space. It's not going to happen. And I've also heard on the capital side where the individual or the fund is excited and interested, but then just doesn't feel that the deals are there that match the investment thesis. And so it's a version of capital maybe not believing that the deals are there, and the entrepreneur not feeling that the capital exists. So how much of that do you think is true? And I don't want to say who's to blame, but are we in a time where both sides need to become a little bit more educated on what exists, where capital can become a little bit more educated on the potential of the projects and the deals, and then as well, the entrepreneur and the projects need to become a little bit more educated? Or what are your thoughts around that?
Well, I don't see a shortage of capital, honestly, in the markets, specifically in Europe. I don't have a very transparent view on the US. I don't see a lack of smart concepts and smart people out there. So I guess it's just also hard work to try to find your right investor and try to find your right company you want to invest in. This probably doesn't fall from heaven, so it's hard work to try to find those connections.
I agree with that. I think you're right, Ruben. I think the intent is probably there from both sides. I do think, generally speaking, the capital markets tend to move more slowly than the entrepreneur side of the equation. And I think that, again, I can only really speak to the US context here, but I do think, commercial real estate, which is sort of the very broad umbrella which this fits within, right, is a slow moving pool of capital. I mean, most of the investors in this industry have been singing from the same hymn book for a long time. And it just takes time to get money managers comfortable with taking risks in, an industry which they don't really know much about. So I do think there is some education required on both sides, which is why organizations like yours, Ruben, are so important. But I agree with Beat that I think the trends are going in the right direction. I think, we've already seen in the US some promising examples of what can happen when you have the combination of a great idea and a proof of concept. But we have to be mindful that, this being fundamentally, at least in part, a real estate business, there are other kind of fundamental things here, like, getting building permits, getting conditional use permits through your local municipality or county, if you need it, that just take a lot of time. And then there are some other structural friction points in the capital markets that I think have made this kind of frustratingly slow for the entrepreneurs that are out there. But I agree that we're going in the right direction, at least.
And, I wish this is, like I said earlier in the call, this is a topic that we can talk about for, literally days on end. And for, I think us three individually, I know we've had many of conversations that could have, offline that could last forever and ever. And it's a very interesting topic. But one last question I do want to ask each of you, and feel free to give any color and context that you like. But, as you're looking forward from today moving forward and kind of forget, as many people are trying to forget what happened from February to May, looking forward, are you more optimistic about the investment climate and, the projects that are underway, or are you still a little bit pessimistic because, we just don't know, every week seems to be changing. Every hour there's a new news cycle, and who knows what's going to happen in November and December. I mean, are you, in your day-to-day operations still placing pretty optimistic bets, or do you feel that you're still hedging? Are you more pessimistic, optimistic? Is it too early to tell? Are you optimistic on a Tuesday and then pessimistic on a Wednesday? Where are you? Yeah, where are you at now, and where do you see yourself moving forward?
I'm optimistic by nature. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur myself, so you have to have a dose of optimism to do that, right? But I'm optimistic, and the first thing that keeps me optimistic daily, this is going to sound awful, but I don't watch the news. Watching the news for me,
smart man,
a dose of daily kicks in the knees that I just choose to not focus on, and I think the only dose of pessimism is I look at the investment climate, right? And capital is, I think a lot of the companies or structures that were funded and financed kind of pre-COVID or, pre-WeWork and pre-slowdown, to Beat's point, there'll be some cleaning up of that structure and valuation that'll lead to some pain and heartache. So there may be, a little bit of pessimism about that, but ultimately long-term, midterm even, very, very optimistic.
I'm optimistic, and I'll tell you why. I think we have there's such a groundswell in this business of consumer interest at all points of the market. In the US right now, you can pay $4,000 a night to go and stay at a tented pavilion at Amangiri in Utah, and that business is performing extremely well. You can pay a couple of $100 a night to go and stay at a getaway camp outside of however many cities they're in right now. There are multiple branded options in between: auto camp, collective retreats, under canvas, and that's not to mention the however many thousands of listings you have, Ruben, at Glamping Hub that offer experiences at all sorts of price points between those ends of the barbell, and are also performing well. So I think it's hard not to be optimistic in that context, and we see the same trends overseas. I mean, this is just a unique segment of the hospitality industry that is really starting to kick into gear, and the consumer interest is there globally. The capital is starting to organize itself. Of course, COVID is, this has been a hard time for everybody, whether you're an operator, an investor, or borrower, or even just a regular guy like me. But I mean, we even have reasons to be thankful for that, because I think it's opening a lot of people's eyes to this sector as well. So I'm optimistic. I think this industry is going to continue to grow and professionalize and organize itself. And I think all of us on this call have an exciting role to play in that evolution.
Yeah, and I'm optimistic. Obviously, number one, and I just realized when I came back to in the hotel. So people want to travel. They need to go out. And yes, people will wear a mask, and it changes a little bit the behavior, but everybody wants to go out. That's number one. Number two, I believe it's a question of months until a vaccine is there. And then it will be another back to normal again. And number three is, despite all of this, travel and hospitality will be different, yes. probably for the next 10 years or more, post-COVID. And I think then everybody who is maybe not in cruises and flight packages, but in this specific type of the industry is in a pretty good position, given the circumstances. So I share the optimism and the positive opportunities which are out there.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for taking the time to talk to me. Like I said, I wish we could talk about this all day, every day. And, but thank you very much for taking the time. Like we started the conversation, this is such a dense and complicated topic because of how different every project is. And, you guys being able to hop on, shine a little light, give some color to it. It just goes a long way because it's not going to get easier. It's not going to get any less complicated, but there's obviously a path forward. I'm glad you guys are optimistic because I'm super optimistic as well. If you guys would have said pessimistic, I don't know how the conversation would have gone after that, but glad to hear it. And thanks again for taking the time. Appreciate everything that you guys do on a day-to-day conversations and looking forward to seeing how the rest of 2020 shakes out and beyond.
All the best to you. Thanks a lot.
Likewise. Thanks for organizing this, Ruben.
Again, and as always, thank you for joining us. For more information about news and events around the industry, please visit AmericanGlampingAssociation.net or contact info@AmericanGlampingAssociation.net for more information. Take care. Until next time.